Wolf Ridge, Bloodlines. Chapter 1, Return to the Land. My name is Jack Thornhill, 36 years deep in this world, 20 of them given to Uncle Sam as an Army Ranger. 3 combat wounds mark my flesh, but there's one that never healed, invisible, festering in my soul. My wife Ellison is 8 years younger, with amber eyes that appraise the world like it's merchandise awaiting her selection. When I hung up my uniform for good, I proposed we return to my grandfather's ranch in Wolf Creek, to build something permanent far from the military bases where she'd spent years wondering if each goodbye might be our last. But life rarely follows the blueprints of our intentions. Everything changed the day I discovered Ellison's cold disdain for our rural rebirth, and when my war buddy, a ghost I'd buried in my mind years ago, appeared at our door with a bleeding teenager who claimed to be my son. Morning light cut across the valley with surgical precision, each ray dissecting the mist that clung to the overgrown pastures, the kind of crystalline clarity you only find in early autumn when the world hesitates between seasons. Dew-soaked grass darkened my combat boots as I trudged toward the weathered structure crowning the gentle hill, the ancestral Thornhill Ranch, my inheritance, my bloodline's anchor in the world. The house stood like an exhausted sentinel, paint peeled from its clapboards like dead skin, the porch listed to one side as if perpetually leaning into a phantom wind. Roof shingles had abandoned their posts, leaving gaps like missing teeth in an old fighter's smile. But the bones, those massive oak beams hauled up this hill by my grandfather, Jeremiah, nearly a century and a half ago, remained defiant against time's assault. Jesus Christ, Jack, it's even worse than the pictures. Ellison stood behind me, arms crossed against the morning chill that wasn't actually cold enough to justify the gesture, something defensive in her posture, a physical manifestation of disappointment. I studied her. That immaculate ponytail of copper blonde hair, designer jeans that cost more than 3 months' worth of my military housing allowance, city sneakers already baptized in country dust. Her hazel eyes reflected thinly veiled disillusionment. I recognized that she'd expected something different when agreeing to follow me here after my discharge. Maybe a charming suburb with weekend barbecues and neighbors who discussed premium cable dramas over imported wine. Not this skeletal remains of a life she'd never wanted. Plenty of work, I nodded, but the foundation's solid. Grandfather built it to outlast the mountains. Ellison's shoulders rose and fell in a shrug that carried the weight of unspoken regrets. The tension between us was familiar now, a third presence that had taken up residence in our marriage even before my last deployment. After the IED that nearly sent me home in pieces, that tension had grown, stretched, hardened into something that threatened to crack whenever we brushed against it. Like we spoke different languages but refused to admit we couldn't understand each other. I'll start with the roof, I decided, not waiting for her input. First rain and we're swimming indoors. The following days blurred into a frenzy of restoration. I woke before dawn and worked until my hands couldn't distinguish between tools in the advancing darkness. Replaced shingles, patched holes, scrubbed floors until my knuckles bled. Each nail driven, each board secured brought me incrementally closer to something I couldn't articulate. Redemption, peace, purpose. The labor kept the nightmares at bay. The more my body ached, the less room my mind had to replay the ambush that took 4 of my men outside Kandahar. Their screams still visited in the dark, but now they competed with the remembered sounds of hammers and saws, and sometimes lost. On my first Sunday at the ranch, I was dredging silt from the pond when I heard an approaching engine. An ancient pickup, its flanks mottled with rust like some mechanical disease, pulled alongside the house. A lean figure unfolded from the driver's seat, a weathered man in a sun-faded plaid shirt that had witnessed at least a decade of hard work. Looks like the prodigal Thornhills returned. The man limped toward me, extending a calloused hand. Gus Holloway, still running the place next door. Memory stirred. A perpetually scowling neighbor who occasionally brought fresh apples and pumpkins during my childhood visits. Good to see you again, Mr. Holloway, I replied, shaking his hand firmly. Cut that Mr. shit, he growled. I'm too damn old for formalities, call me Gus. He surveyed my work on the pond with narrowed eyes. Not bad. Thornhills always did know how to read the land. Your grandfather used to say, the earth remembers every promise you make to it. Smart old bastard. Something like respect flickered in his gaze. Gus extracted a crumpled pack of cigarettes from his shirt pocket and offered one. I declined, quit in the hospital after they pulled shrapnel from my chest for 9 hours. Brought you something, he said, gesturing toward his truck. Seeds for the north field. Ground there holds moisture better if you're planning to grow anything worthwhile. The gesture caught me off guard. In war and civilian life alike, pure kindness without agenda had become rare enough to seem suspicious. Thanks, Gus, that's thoughtful. He nodded, requiring no gratitude. Heard about your unit, he said abruptly. Rough business. My body tensed. I don't discuss that day. Rough's one word for it, I answered tersely. Vietnam, Mekong Delta 69, Gus continued, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond me. The real hell isn't what happens to you. It's watching it happen to your boys and standing there with your dick in your hand, helpless. My breath caught. He understood, actually understood. How did you handle it? I asked, surprising myself with the question. Gus barked a laugh devoid of humor. You don't handle it, son. You just keep waking up every morning. One day maybe you realize you went a whole hour without thinking about it. Then maybe a whole afternoon. Never goes away completely. Just gets manageable. We stood in silence. Two soldiers separated by generations but united in that exclusive brotherhood that requires no membership cards or secret handshakes. Only blood and survival and the ghosts we carry. Gus slapped my shoulder. Come to church Sunday. Pastor Reed was military too, chaplain. You'll like him. Sheriff Bancroft'll be there too. He knew your father. After Gus left, I stored the seeds in the barn and returned to my labor. For the first time since discharge, I felt I might have made the right choice coming back here. That evening, bone-weary but satisfied with the day's progress, I entered the house. Ellison sat on the porch, phone in hand, but quickly slipped it into her pocket when she noticed me. Met one of the neighbors, I said, washing grime from my hands at the kitchen sink. Gus Holloway, remember me telling you about him? The old guy who talks to his cows, she asked without real interest. Vietnam vet, I replied, feeling strangely protective of Gus. Good man, invited us to church on Sunday, chance to meet people. Ellison rolled her eyes. Fantastic, Holy Communion and conversations about fertilizer, living the dream. I swallowed a sharp response. Another argument wouldn't solve anything. It's our chance to become part of something here, Ellison. I know, Jack, her voice softened slightly. It's just so different from everything I'm used to. Give me time, okay? I nodded, feeling the tension between us ease fractionally. Maybe, with patience, she could learn to love this place as I did. Sunday morning found us at Wolf Creek Community Church, a modest white building whose steeple stood sentinel over the town center. Inside smelled of old wood, beeswax, and generations of faith. After the service, congregants gathered on the church lawn around tables laden with potluck offerings. Pastor Reed, a tall, silver-haired man with penetrating eyes, approached us first. Jack Thornhill, he clasped my hand between both of his. Welcome back to our community. Your grandfather was a pillar of this church, and you must be Mrs. Thornhill, he turned to Ellison. Yes, Ellison, she smiled her professional smile, the one that never reached her eyes. Beautiful church, Pastor. Gus mentioned you served as a chaplain, I inquired. Reed nodded. 22 years, saw humanity at its worst and its best, which is why I treasure what we have here, peace, community, the luxury of ordinary days. Something in his words resonated within me. Not every day feels ordinary, I admitted quietly. He nodded with understanding. My door is always open, not just for Sunday services. A heavy-set man in a sheriff's uniform approached, his substantial belly straining against his belt. Despite his imposing physique, his eyes were sharp and alert. "Sheriff Marcus Bancroft," he introduced himself. "Your father was my best friend growing up, Jack. He'd be proud seeing you restore the family place." As we conversed, other locals gravitated toward us, while Ellison made small talk with farmers' wives, clearly bored but too polite to show it openly. I noticed the men's conversation taking a serious turn. "It's all Preston," Gus said, leaning over a table of pies. "Buying up land left and right. Half the county's in his pocket already." "Victor Preston?" I asked, recognizing the name. "He was a kid when I left." The sheriff nodded. "Same one. Left a boy, returned a wealthy businessman. Talks about revitalizing the area, creating jobs, turning our sleepy town into some kind of resort destination." "And people believe him," I raised an eyebrow. "When someone offers 5 times market value for land that's been bleeding money for decades," Gus snorted. "You're damn right they believe." Pastor Reed looked at me thoughtfully. "The Wilkinson property that borders your western boundary was sold to Preston last week. Old man signed the papers after Sunday service." "God damn it," Gus shook his head. "Now he's got a foothold right next to your land, Thornhill. And without your ranch, his grand scheme falls apart. It's the geographic centerpiece." "You think he'll try to buy me out too?" I asked, feeling a prickle of unease. "He'll certainly try," the sheriff replied. "Question is how persistent he'll be." Gus scoffed. "Plenty persistent. Men like Preston aren't accustomed to hearing no." I noticed Ellison listening intently to our conversation, her eyes suddenly animated with interest. "Is Preston married?" she asked unexpectedly, breaking away from her conversation with the farmers' wives. Gus shook his head. "Bachelor. Lives in that big house on the ridge, drives into town in suits that cost more than my monthly milk sales. Reputation as a ladies' man, generous with gifts from what I hear." Something unpleasant twisted in my gut when I noticed Ellison's eyes light up. But Sheriff Bancroft was already changing the subject, asking about my plans for the ranch, and the moment passed. A week later, Ellison and I drove into town for supplies. I needed parts for the tractor I was resurrecting, and our refrigerator needed restocking. "Meet you at checkout in an hour," Ellison said, heading toward the grocery aisles while I went to the hardware section. My conversation with the store clerk about parts ran longer than expected. When I went looking for Ellison, I found her in the wine section, engaged in animated conversation with a tall man in an expensive suit that seemed comically out of place in the rural store. The man, early 40s, athletic build, meticulously styled dark hair and a perfect smile, stood uncomfortably close to my wife. Ellison looked more vibrant than I'd seen her since our arrival, laughing and touching his arm, tilting her head to expose her neck in a flirtatious gesture I knew all too well. I approached as the man was saying, "What's a spectacular woman like you doing in our little backwater? You belong on magazine covers, not milking cows." Ellison, visibly flattered, replied with a smile, "Sometimes life takes unexpected detours." I cleared my throat and they both turned. "Jack," Ellison exclaimed with slight surprise, "we were just talking about you." The man extended his hand smoothly. "Victor Preston, you must be Jack Thornhill. Finally we meet." So this was Preston. I shook his offered hand, feeling the tension between us like a live wire. His grip was firm but performative, displaying strength he didn't truly possess. "Heard you've been busy in our area," I said neutrally. "Quite the investor." Preston smiled, but his eyes remained calculating, trying to breathe life back into places that deserve a second chance. "Noticed your ranch, excellent location, prime real estate. Heard you've started renovation work." Not renovation, I corrected. Resurrection. The Thornhill Ranch never died, just slept for a while. His smile widened, poetic, but in today's economy, small ranches barely survive. Agribusiness, economies of scale, you understand. Economics isn't my strength, I replied, feeling irritation rise. Tradition matters more to me. Heritage, bloodlines. Preston casually touched Ellison's shoulder. Your wife is absolutely captivating. She told me about her design work in San Diego. Such talent. Actually, I may have opportunities for her regarding my development project's aesthetics, something we should discuss in a more appropriate setting. I noticed Ellison's eyes brighten at his words. Before our move, she'd worked at an upscale restaurant while pursuing her dream of interior design, never quite getting the promotion she craved. That would be wonderful, she said enthusiastically. And naturally, I'd love to discuss potential collaboration regarding your ranch with both of you, Preston added. I'm certain we could reach a mutually beneficial arrangement. The land isn't for sale, I stated flatly. Preston raised his hands placatingly. I meant collaboration, not acquisition, though I must admit my offer would be extremely generous. We should at least listen, Ellison interjected unexpectedly. In today's world, all options deserve consideration, don't they, Jack? I felt anger bubbling inside. Not at Preston's proposal. I'd encountered plenty of his type before, but at how easily Ellison aligned herself with him. We need to go, I said, taking our shopping basket. Nice meeting you, Mr. Preston. The drive home passed in tense silence, Ellison tapping her fingers against her knee irritably. When we reached the ranch, she finally spoke. You were rude. He was flirting with you right in front of me. He was being polite, she countered. Unlike you, and he mentioned real work for me, Jack. Actual design work, not pulling weeds for the rest of my life. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. He wants our land, Ellison. He's using you to get to it. Or maybe he actually recognizes my talents, she shot back. Not all men see me as an accessory to a ranch, you know. The comment struck deeper than she knew. I understood her ambitions, her desire for recognition, but I also sensed Preston's calculated insincerity behind his perfect smile. Do what you want, I said wearily. Just don't sell the ranch while I'm out fixing fences. It was meant as a bitter joke. Ellison didn't laugh, just exited the truck silently and walked to the house. I remained behind the wheel, watching the fields that were slowly coming back to life under my hands. Something told me meeting Preston was just the beginning of our troubles. In the days that followed, Ellison grew even more distant. She made frequent trips into town for errands, returning late, smelling of unfamiliar cologne. I didn't question her, focusing instead on the ranch work. Gus Holloway helped me restore the old irrigation system, and I planted a test acre of wheat in the northern section using his seeds. One day, the tractor I'd been battling for days refused to start altogether. Abandoning the futile effort, I decided to return to the house earlier than usual. Ellison was supposed to be in town for an interview Preston had arranged. At least, that's what she'd said that morning. The house was empty. Upstairs in our bedroom, I noticed a receipt on Ellison's vanity from an expensive restaurant in the neighboring town. Dinner for two, costly wine. The date, 3 days earlier when Ellison claimed she was at a book club meeting. Something cold and heavy settled in my chest. I didn't want to believe the obvious, but the pieces assembled into an unmistakable picture. I spent the day working on the generator, trying not to think about Ellison and her lies. When darkness fell, I sat on the porch with a bottle of whiskey, an old habit I'd tried to break after the hospital. Ellison returned after midnight. Stepping from a taxi, she hesitated, seeing me on the porch. Jack, surprise and alarm colored her voice. Why aren't you asleep? She smelled of alcohol and that same unfamiliar men's cologne. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and her blouse collar was carefully arranged to hide what looked suspiciously like a hickey. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice unnervingly calm to my own ears. "I told you the interview. It ran late, then dinner with potential colleagues." She faltered under my steady gaze. "At 4 in the afternoon, until midnight." Ellison dropped her eyes. "We went for drinks after. I meant to call, but my phone died." I pulled the restaurant receipt from my pocket. "Was this an interview too, 3 days ago?" Her face paled, but something like relief flickered in her eyes, as if she'd grown tired of the deception. "It's not what you think," she began with the classic phrase from bad movies. "Then what is it, Ellison? Explain." She sat on the step beside me, maintaining distance. "I've been meeting with Victor," she admitted. "We've been discussing my role in his company. In restaurants, over $200 wine. He's wealthy, Jack. He's accustomed to certain standards, and he sees potential in me that nobody else does." I took a swallow from the bottle, feeling the liquor burn my throat. "He sees you as his path to our land, and you're letting him use you." "That's not true," she exclaimed. "I'm just tired of all this. The dirt, the isolation, your damn silence at night and screaming when nightmares come." Her words cut deeper than I expected. I knew I cried out in sleep sometimes. Knew I woke drenched in sweat, unable to distinguish reality from horror, but hearing her weaponize this against me. "And Preston offers you an escape?" I asked quietly. Ellison's silence answered more honestly than words could have. I stood suddenly exhausted. "Go to bed, Ellison, we'll talk tomorrow." The next morning, I woke earlier than usual and went downstairs for coffee before starting the day's work. A folder that hadn't been there the night before sat on the kitchen table. Opening, it revealed property sale documents, a preliminary agreement with Preston's company, already signed by Ellison using my name. Beside it lay an old power of attorney I'd given her before my last deployment to handle routine matters. Rage surged through me. Clutching the documents, I stormed onto the porch where Ellison sat with coffee, leafing through a magazine. "What the hell is this?" I threw the papers onto the table before her. She flinched but quickly composed herself. "I was just exploring options, Jack. The offer is incredibly generous, triple the market value. We could buy a house near the ocean, maybe even in San Diego. You signed papers behind my back. Using a power of attorney I gave you to pay bills, not sell my heritage." "Our heritage," she snapped. "I'm your wife, remember, and the documents aren't finalized yet, they need notarization." I inhaled deeply, fighting for control. "The land isn't for sale, Ellison. This is the Thornhill family ranch. My grandfather built this house. My father poured his life into this soil." "And what about me?" Her eyes blazed with sudden anger. "What about what I want, Jack? I'm suffocating here. The constant dirt, the isolation, the—" She stopped abruptly, realizing she was repeating yesterday's argument. "If you're so unhappy here, maybe you should leave," I suggested, words escaping before I could reconsider them. Ellison stared at me, eyes wide. "Are you throwing me out?" "No," I shook my head. "I'm saying if you can't be happy with me here, maybe you should find your happiness somewhere else." She opened her mouth to respond, but was interrupted by the sound of an approaching vehicle. We both turned. An old, battered SUV I'd never seen before was making its way toward the house. "Expecting someone?" Ellison asked tensely. I shook my head, instinctively preparing for potential danger. War never completely releases its grip. The vehicle stopped, and an emaciated man with wild ginger hair and sunken eyes struggled out. His face was covered with dust and dried blood. He leaned heavily against the hood, as if he might collapse at any moment. It took me several seconds to recognize my former comrade Samuel Bones Freeman, the combat medic who'd pulled me from the wreckage in Kandahar. The same Bones everyone believed had died 5 years ago during an operation in southern Mexico. "Thornhill, help," he managed to gasp, before pointing weakly toward the back seat of the SUV. I rushed to the vehicle and found a teenage boy with bronze skin and coal-black hair lying unconscious. His shoulder and chest were wrapped in blood-soaked bandages. Carefully, trying not to cause additional pain, I lifted him from the car and carried him into the house, laying him on the couch in the living room. Ellison, setting aside our disagreement, helped Bones to an armchair and brought water. "What happened? Who is he?" I asked as she retrieved the first aid kit. Bones took several desperate gulps of water before speaking. "I didn't die in that operation," he began with a raspy voice. "Was captured, drug cartel, 5 years in hell," he coughed, choking on memories. "This woman Isabel, his mother, she helped me escape. They killed her in front of the boy, they're after him now." I examined the teenager's wounds, gunshot clean through and through. The boy couldn't be older than 15. Despite his injuries and unconscious state, his face held a strange determination. "Who shot him?" I asked, applying a fresh bandage to the wound. "Cartel soldiers," Bones replied, starting to regain his composure. "They're hunting him because of documents in his possession, evidence linking the cartel to American businessmen and politicians. If those papers reach the right authorities, several powerful people on both sides of the border will face serious consequences." Ellison, tending to the boy's wounds, suddenly froze. "Wait, so this child is from Mexico. What's his connection to you?" Bones and I exchanged heavy glances. He took a deep breath. "His name is Mateo. His mother Isabel. You remember her, Jack, in Sonora during that border operation against the cartel, before you were wounded." Isabel? Of course I remembered her. A young nurse with luminous dark eyes and a warm smile that made me forget about war, if only for a few brief hours. We'd spent just a few weeks together before my injury and emergency evacuation. I never expected to see her again, but always remembered her fondly. But that was, I felt the blood drain from my face. Christ, 15 years ago. 15 years and 4 months, to be precise, Bones nodded. "Isabel always knew who fathered her child. She told him about you, kept your photo. When I was captured, I ended up in the same clinic where she worked. Small world, huh? Jack, this boy, he's your son." I stared at the teenager in shock, searching for and finding my own features in his face. The same stubborn chin, the same eyebrow line. A whirlwind of emotions crashed through me. Shock, disbelief, guilt, and then a sudden, piercing sense of responsibility. "Why didn't she tell me?" I asked, still struggling to process reality. "I would have." "What would you have done, Jack?" Bones interrupted. "You were a ranger with constant deployments to hotspots. Your connection was circumstantial, a brief encounter. She loved you but didn't want to derail your life." Ellison, stunned by this revelation, backed against the wall. "Holy shit, you have a son. All these years you had a child you never bothered to tell me about." "I didn't know either," I answered, unable to take my eyes off Mateo. "I swear I didn't know. Besides, this all happened before we even met." At that moment the boy began regaining consciousness. His eyes, identical to his mother's, flew open in fear. He tried to sit up but immediately fell back, wincing in pain. "Donde estamos? ¿Quién son estas personas?" he asked Bones in Spanish. "Where are we? Who are these people?" Bones answered in the same language, pointing to me. "You're safe. This is your father, Mateo. We found him." The boy studied me with an evaluating gaze. In his eyes flashed recognition, then disappointment, and finally, wariness. "Tu eres mi padre?" he asked directly. "You're my father." I recalled my Spanish from border operations. "Sí, soy yo." "Yes, I am." Mateo turned away, muttering, "Demasiado tarde." Too late. Those two simple words cut deeper than any knife. They contained so much pain, so many unspoken reproaches, that I momentarily forgot how to breathe. Bones continued explaining the situation. The people hunting Mateo are extremely dangerous. They're already in the country, I'm certain, and they won't stop until they retrieve the documents and silence all witnesses. At that moment, we heard a vehicle approaching. Looking out the window, I saw Preston's expensive black SUV. Beside it stood two men of distinctly Latin American appearance with the watchful eyes and tense postures of professional bodyguards. "Ellison, what's he doing here?" I turned to my wife, suddenly understanding. "You called him, told him I found the sale documents." Her frightened expression confirmed my suspicion. "We need to get Bones and the boy to the cellar," I ordered. "Now." In that moment, everything changed. Past and future collided at one point. My unknown son, a comrade thought dead, my unfaithful wife, and enemies at the gate. But strangest of all, I suddenly felt an extraordinary clarity. As if all these years since the war, I'd been wandering in a fog and now finally could see the path ahead. The Thornhill Ranch was supposed to be my sanctuary, a place to heal from war. Now it had become a fortress I would have to defend, and I was ready. Chapter 2: Strangers and Kin. I hustled them into the cellar as fast as possible. Bones, grimacing from pain and old wounds, helped me carry the semi-conscious Mateo down the narrow staircase into the cold underground chamber my grandfather had built as a fallout shelter during the Cold War. Thick concrete walls, ancient preserves on dusty shelves, a military cot in the corner, perfect hiding place for people who needed to disappear. By the time Preston's black SUV stopped in front of the house, I had already returned upstairs and stood on the porch, clutching an old military knife in my pocket, the only weapon immediately available. Ellison emerged to greet our visitors, wringing her hands and trying to appear casual. She wasn't succeeding. It always amazed me how quickly a person could transform from civilian to soldier. Feel danger, and suddenly you're scanning terrain, assessing threats, identifying cover and escape routes. Right now I saw not a businessman in an expensive suit, but an adversary. And judging by his entourage, two stocky men with the cold eyes of professional killers, the threat was very real. "Jack," Preston smiled with false cordiality. "Hope I'm not interrupting. Ellison mentioned you found the documents we discussed, and you had some questions." "Indeed I do," I replied, maintaining outward calm. "Like why my wife is signing papers behind my back, and why you're offering below market value while promising her golden mountains." Preston paused, surveying the yard and house as if appraising livestock. "Jack, let's be realistic. This ranch is falling apart. The soil is depleted. Revitalizing it would take years and hundreds of thousands in investments. My offer is a lifeline, not exploitation." I stepped forward. "Maybe I don't want a lifeline. Maybe I want to resurrect what my grandfather built. This is the Thornhill ancestral home, Preston. It's not for sale." Ellison tried to intervene. "Jack, we should at least hear specific numbers." "There's nothing to discuss," I cut her off. "The documents are illegal and I don't recognize them. Now, if you don't mind, I have work to do." Preston's mask of friendliness vanished. His face hardened. "You're making a mistake, Thornhill. A big mistake. The entire town is moving toward the future while you're clinging to the past. Just like in war, you're not seeing the complete picture." One of Preston's Latin American companions suddenly showed interest in tire tracks from Bones' vehicle on the driveway. He bent down, ran his finger through the fresh mud print, then whispered something to Preston, whose expression immediately changed. "Someone else visit you today?" he asked with forced casualness. "Mail carrier," I lied. "Delivered tractor parts." Preston maintained a long pause, studying me. "Well, consider my offer. I'm patient but not infinitely so." As they were leaving, I noticed the bodyguard surreptitiously photographing the house and yard with his phone. Bad sign. Very bad. Once Preston's vehicle disappeared from view, Ellison grabbed my sleeve. "Jack, you need to be careful, those men with him. They're not ordinary bodyguards, something in their eyes." "I know," I interrupted. "And do you understand what you've dragged us into?" She looked away. I didn't think it was this serious. He seemed so normal, talked about business, town development. "Oh, I'm sure he's very convincing." Bitterness edged my voice. "Especially when offering your dream job and expensive dinners." Ellison flushed. "You have no right to judge me. You brought me to this wasteland without even asking what I wanted. And now we have an injured teenager and my friend everyone thought was dead in our cellar. And they're being hunted by people who clearly wouldn't hesitate to kill us all. So your grievances can wait." I descended to the cellar, where Bones had already settled Mateo on the cot and treated his wound with fresh bandages from the first aid kit Ellison had brought. "How is he?" I asked quietly. "He'll live," Bones replied, wiping his hands on a threadbare towel. "Bullet went straight through, only damaged soft tissue, but he needs rest and antibiotics. Serious antibiotics, not the kind in home medicine cabinets." Mateo lay with open eyes, staring at the ceiling. His face remained impassive, but I'd seen enough such expressions to know. Beneath that mask raged a storm of emotions. "Do you speak English?" I asked him. "Yes," he answered with a slight accent. "Mother taught me, said it might be useful when I found you." His words carried an implicit reproach, but I couldn't blame him. "I'm sorry I didn't know about you," I said, sitting on the edge of the cot. "If I had known—" "What?" he interrupted. "What would you have done? Left the army, taken us to America?" He laughed bitterly. "Mother never blamed you. She said you were a soldier, you had your own path. She was proud of you." His words hit me harder than any accusation could have. I felt a lump form in my throat. Isabel, a woman I'd known for just a few weeks, with whom I'd shared a bed between missions, had proven better, nobler than me. She'd raised my son alone, in a dangerous country, never speaking ill of the father he'd never met. "Who are these people hunting you?" I asked, changing the subject. Mateo remained silent, so Bones answered. "The Northern Star Cartel, one of the most brutal in Mexico. They don't just traffic drugs. They control entire regions, bribe politicians, maintain connections with major businesses in the States. And these businessmen have displeased them," I guessed. "Isabel worked at a clinic that laundered cartel money," Bones continued. "She spent years gathering information, photographs of meetings, recorded conversations, bank statements. When I was captured, she helped me escape. They killed her." His voice broke. "Right in front of Mateo. He managed to flee with the documents she had collected as insurance. Names, dates, amounts. Enough to send several very influential people on both sides of the border to prison for decades." I looked at Mateo, who still wouldn't meet my eyes. "And you came here to find me. Why?" "Because Mom said you were brave," he answered quietly. "That you protect the innocent, that you're a just man." He pronounced these last words with such doubt that it felt like a punch to my gut. In his eyes I saw the silent question. Are you really the man my mother described? Or was she wrong? "Where are these documents now?" I asked. "In a safe place." He finally turned to face me. "As long as I have them, the cartel won't stop. They've sent their best man after us, Alejandro Vega. Everyone calls him El Fantasma, not because he's friendly." The name made Bones flinch, and a chill ran down my spine. I recognized one of Preston's bodyguards as a professional killer, from his cold eyes, the subtle bulge under his jacket where a pistol surely hid, the way he assessed the surrounding space. And everything fell into place. "Preston works with the cartel," I said, "and now he knows you're here." The next morning, I left Bones and Mateo at the ranch and drove into town to meet the sheriff. I needed help, and Bancroft was the only authority figure I trusted. Ellison insisted on coming with me. She didn't want to stay at the ranch with strangers, as she called them. On the drive, she nervously bit her lips. What if the sheriff is working with Preston? In small towns like this, everyone's connected. I shook my head. Bancroft was friends with my father. They grew up together. If I can't trust him, I can't trust anyone. The sheriff's office was cool and smelled of coffee. Bancroft listened attentively, writing in a notebook with an old-fashioned ballpoint pen. I explained the situation, omitting details about the cartel documents and focusing on the threat to Mateo. So you suddenly discover a 15-year-old son from Mexico being hunted by drug traffickers, he summarized. And you believe Preston might somehow be involved. Jack, these are serious allegations. I'm not making allegations, Sheriff, I objected. I'm just describing facts. Those two Latin Americans with Preston weren't ordinary business partners. They surveyed the ranch like a military target. The sheriff leaned back in his chair, thoughtfully tapping his pen against the desk. Listen, Jack, I have no reason to doubt you. Your family has always been pillars of the community, but suspicions are one thing, evidence another. I can't start an investigation against the most influential man in the county based on your hunches. Ellison, silent until now, interjected. Sheriff, we're not asking you to arrest Preston. We just want to protect the boy. Couldn't you arrange patrols in the area, or at least check out these foreigners? The sheriff regarded her with interest. Curious to hear this from you, Mrs. Thornhill, especially considering that yesterday you were ready to sell the ranch to the very man you're now accusing. Ellison blushed but held his gaze. I made a mistake. Now we're talking about a child's safety. Intrigued by this change of heart, the sheriff decided to share information. I can't officially start an investigation, but I do know some things about Preston. For the past 6 months, the FBI has shown interest in him. Nothing specific, just regular inquiries. And yes, he does have business partners from Latin America financing his resort project. He presents them as investors from a respected Mexican financial group. Ellison and I exchanged glances. The sheriff continued, I can't provide official protection without concrete evidence of threat, but I can make sure patrol cars pass by your ranch more frequently, and I'll give you my personal number, call at the slightest suspicion. As we left the sheriff's office, I noticed Preston's black SUV in the parking lot. I pointed it out to Ellison. See, he's watching us. She swallowed hard, wrapping her arms around herself as if suddenly cold. God, Jack, what have I gotten us into? Exiting the sheriff's office, we bumped into a woman carrying a stack of medical charts. Startled, she dropped several folders which I helped collect. Thanks, she said with a slight smile. You must be Jack Thornhill. I'm Haley Raymond, work at the local clinic. Heard you'd returned to your ranch. I was surprised she knew me. News travels fast in small towns. Especially when it involves the return of a local hero, she nodded. My father told stories about your family. He treated your grandfather in his final years. Haley turned out to be not just a nurse, but a retired military medic who'd served in Afghanistan and Iraq. In her eyes, I recognized the same understanding I'd seen in Gus, knowledge of war, not from movies or books, but first-hand experience. We talked about places we'd both served, bases and hospitals, and for the first time in ages, I felt truly understood without needing to explain. Ellison silently observed our conversation, and I saw in her eyes a mixture of jealousy and relief. She'd never understood the part of my life connected to the military, and truthfully, I hadn't tried very hard to explain. At some point, an idea struck me. I took Haley aside and, lowering my voice, explained the situation with injured Mateo without detailing the cartel connection. An old friend brought my son, whom I didn't know existed. The boy's wounded, gunshot through and through. We treated the wound, but he needs antibiotics and professional examination. We can't take him to the hospital, for various reasons. Haley listened without interrupting, then nodded without hesitation. I have a short shift today. I can stop by your place afterward and check on the boy. Ellison approached as we arranged timing. Are you sure you want to get involved in this? We don't know how serious it might be." Haley regarded her with a calm, assessing look. "Mrs. Thornhill, when a child is injured, the seriousness of the situation is irrelevant. My duty is to help." Her words contained no judgment, just the certainty of someone who knows their obligations. And in that moment, I realized I'd found an ally. That evening, Haley arrived at the ranch with a full bag of medical supplies. She thoroughly examined Mateo's wound, changed the dressings, and explained to me how to properly care for it moving forward. "These antibiotics are strong," she said, arranging packages of pills on the table. "Twice daily with food, and monitor his temperature. If it rises above 100 degrees F, call me immediately." Mateo, normally reserved and wary with me, unexpectedly opened up to Haley. She spoke to him in fluent Spanish, asking about his life in Mexico, his mother, his interests. And I learned about my son with surprise, a boy who loved playing guitar, dreamed of becoming a mechanic who builds custom motorcycles, who had been helping his mother in the clinic since he was 5. "He's an extraordinary boy," Haley said later when we stepped onto the porch. "He's endured so much but hasn't broken. There's a lot of your stubbornness and resilience in him." "I don't know how to connect with him," I admitted. "He looks at me like a stranger, and I understand to him I am a stranger." Haley placed her hand on my shoulder. "Give him time. He's confused and frightened right now. He needs to be convinced you're truly ready to be his father, not just someone who feels obligated to help." At that moment, Ellison came onto the porch. She noticed Haley's hand on my shoulder and the intimacy of our conversation. "Dinner's almost ready," she said curtly. "Haley, will you stay?" Haley, sensing the tension, politely declined, but before leaving gave me her phone number. "Call any time, day or night, if the boy's condition worsens." After she left, Ellison silently cleared the table. I sensed she wanted to say something but hesitated. "Thanks for helping with dinner," I said, breaking the silence. She nodded without looking at me. "I made a terrible mistake, Jack, not just with the documents. I told Preston about you, that you're a former ranger, that you wake up from nightmares, even where you keep your military equipment. I thought it was just conversation, but he used me." Her voice conveyed genuine remorse, and I felt some of my anger subsiding. "What's done is done," I said. "Now we need to protect Mateo and ourselves." She finally met my eyes. "I'm on your side, Jack, whatever happens next." I nodded, unsure if I could fully trust her again, but willing to give her another chance. What I didn't know, and couldn't know, was that at that very moment, an intense meeting was taking place in Preston's luxurious office downtown. Across from him sat that same Latin American with cold eyes, Alejandro Vega, professional killer for the Northern Star Cartel. "You're certain it's the same boy?" Preston asked nervously, drumming his fingers on the desk. Vega nodded. "Absolutely. Tire tracks match the vehicle the military doctor escaped in, and the man I glimpsed through the window is definitely Samuel Freeman. He's changed drastically, but it's him." Preston stood, walked to the bar, and poured himself whiskey. "This complicates everything. I just wanted to buy the land for our project, and now I have a fugitive with documents that could destroy us all on my target property." "Not all of us," Vega coldly clarified. "Only those who don't know how to cover their tracks. My employers are extremely displeased with your management of the situation, Victor. First, you failed to legally acquire the key property, now this." Preston waved dismissively. "I was one step away from purchasing the ranch. If that stubborn soldier hadn't unexpectedly returned, or if his wife had been more efficient with the paperwork, everything would be settled." Vega shrugged. If only, if only. The cartel isn't interested in excuses. They want results. And right now, we need two outcomes: recover the documents and silence everyone who knows about them. "What do you suggest?" Preston asked, trying to hide his nervousness. Kill them all and be done with it, Vega replied. The ranch is isolated, neighbors far away. We'll surround the house at night when they're sleeping, retrieve the documents, and arrange an accident. Gas stove, leak, explosion. Such old wiring, such deteriorated pipes. No one will be surprised. Preston paled. You're talking about murdering an entire family. There's a woman and child there. Vega looked at him with undisguised contempt. And you thought the millions flowing through your account smelled like roses. You knew what you were getting into when you agreed to cooperate. Now is not the time for a sudden attack of conscience. Preston downed his whiskey, surrendering. His smooth business scheme had transformed into a bloody nightmare, but he'd gone too far to retreat. When? He asked hollowly. Tomorrow night, Vega replied. My men are already en route. Of course, I learned all this much later. That evening, I simply sensed we had little time and began preparing our defense. We can't count on police help, I said, assembling a war council in the kitchen. That means we defend ourselves. I spread an old ranch map drawn by my grandfather on the table. The property has several defensive advantages. First, open fields on 3 sides. No one approaches unseen. Second, the old bunker in the cellar, emergency shelter if necessary. Third, the field irrigation system. If restored, it could become an unexpected asset. Mateo, silent until now, suddenly showed interest. Irrigation system, how does it work? I explained the principle behind the old sprinklers which, at full pressure, create a virtual water wall around the central part of the ranch. To my surprise, Mateo's eyes lit up. I can help restore it. In Mexico, I worked with irrigation systems on my uncle's avocado plantation. You understand irrigation? I couldn't hide my surprise. Mateo shrugged. I understand many things. When you're constantly relocating, you learn whatever might prove useful. There was no boasting in his voice, just a statement of fact that made my heart ache. At 15, he'd already been forced to become an adult, to learn survival in a world that shows no mercy to the weak. For the next 2 days, the ranch transformed into a fortified camp. I installed makeshift alarms around the perimeter, tin cans on fishing line that would rattle if triggered. Mateo, despite his wound, helped restore the irrigation system, demonstrating unexpected technical knowledge. Bones, using his experience as a combat medic, organized something like a field hospital in the cellar, prepared bandage supplies, antiseptics, painkillers. Ellison, feeling out of place amid these military preparations, took charge of provisions, food, water, flashlights, batteries. She made trips to town for supplies, returning increasingly nervous, insisting she was being followed. While working on the irrigation system, Mateo and I cautiously began learning about each other. I asked about his life, about Isabel, about what she was like. At first he answered tersely, but gradually opened up. She always spoke well of you, he admitted. Even when I felt bad about not having a father like other kids, she never said anything negative. She said you were a brave man who protected others. I was touched by his words. Why didn't she contact me? I would have helped. Mateo pondered. She said you had your own road, your own destiny. That the world needed you for other purposes, not to be stuck in a Mexican village with a woman you barely knew and a child you hadn't asked for. These words struck me profoundly, such selflessness, such devotion. I felt a lump form in my throat. She was an extraordinary woman. I wish I'd known her better. Mateo nodded. Yes, she was special. She taught me never to surrender no matter what happens. He paused, then added, she would be proud of what you're doing now, that you're protecting me even without knowing me. That evening, after finishing work on the irrigation system, I found an old collection of baseball cards I'd kept since childhood. To my surprise, Mateo showed genuine interest, explaining that in Mexico he'd also loved baseball, though rarely had the chance to play. I never had a real glove, he confessed. We made them from cardboard and leather scraps. I retrieved 2 old baseball gloves and a ball from the barn. Later, when your shoulder's better, we could toss the ball around. An uncertain but sincere smile flickered across Mateo's face. I'd like that. In that moment, I realized I was ready to give my life protecting this boy. Not from obligation or guilt, but because he was my flesh and blood, a part of me I hadn't known but already loved. My son, my future, the continuation of the Thornhill bloodline. That evening I stood long on the porch, watching the stars and listening to night sounds. For the first time in ages, I felt I'd found my place in the world. I'd returned to the ancestral home not just to lick my wounds, but to begin a new life. And I was prepared to fight for it with everything I had. But somewhere beyond the hills, hidden in the night's darkness, people were already gathering whose sole purpose was to take everything from me, my son, my ranch, my very life. I sensed their approach with every cell in my body, like a predator senses an approaching storm. And I knew, tomorrow, the real war would begin. Chapter 3: The Sea. Morning arrived with an oppressive silence. Too quiet. Standing on the porch with coffee, I listened to this deafening stillness, feeling mounting apprehension. 18 years of war taught me, silence before battle is the most terrifying sound in the world. Everyone inside still slept. Bones and Mateo on cots in the cellar we'd converted to a shelter. Ellison upstairs in the bedroom, having tossed and turned all night. She'd insisted on going to town today, ostensibly for groceries, but I understood there was more. Perhaps she still hoped to resolve the situation with Preston. I let her go, not because I believed in her scheme's success, but because I knew you can't hold someone against their will, even if that someone is your wife. And it would seem suspicious if our regular trips to town suddenly stopped, as if we suspected something. At that time, I didn't know this decision would change everything. Ellison drove to town, nervously tapping her fingers on the steering wheel. We barely spoke that morning. I gave her money for groceries and antibiotics for Mateo while she avoided meeting my eyes. As parting words, I simply said, "Be careful." She nodded and drove away without looking back. In town, she parked near the cafe where she was supposed to meet Preston. They'd arranged this by phone. Ellison waited, anxiously checking the time on her phone. Preston was late, which was unlike him. Suddenly she noticed him exiting an office building across the street. Beside him walked Vega, that same Latin American with the cold eyes. They appeared to be arguing intensely. When the cafe door opened, admitting a new customer, Ellison caught fragments of Vega's words. By midnight everything must be finished. No witnesses. Preston noticed her and immediately transformed, tension replaced by a smile, voice turning velvet. Vega intercepted his glance, saw Ellison, and likewise instantly morphed from aggressive opponent to polite businessman. This synchronized transition frightened her more than the overheard words. "Ellison, sorry for being late," Preston said, approaching her table. "Final details of a business meeting." Vega smiled, but his eyes remained cold as a shark's. "Lovely to see you again, Mrs. Thornhill. I hope your husband and his guests are in good health." Ellison felt ice form in her stomach. "Yes, thank you for your concern." Preston shot Vega a quick glance. "Weren't you rushing to another meeting?" Vega nodded. "Of course, pleasure seeing you, Mrs. Thornhill. Give my warmest regards to your husband and his son, Mateo, correct?" After Vega left, Ellison realized she'd walked into a trap. She had never mentioned the boy's name in conversations with Preston. "How does he know Mateo's name?" she asked directly. "I never told you what Jack's son is called." Preston hesitated but quickly recovered. "You must have mentioned it, or perhaps I heard it around town. News spreads quickly." The attempt to change subject failed. Now Ellison knew with certainty. She needed to return to the ranch and warn us as soon as possible. She glanced at her watch. "Sorry, but I need to go. I promised to be back for dinner." On the drive home, Ellison couldn't shake the oppressive sense of dread. Vega's phrase about midnight and no witnesses echoed in her mind. They were planning murder, her husband, the boy, everyone at the ranch. Perhaps her too. As she approached the ranch, darkness was falling. Ellison noticed a black SUV parked on the dirt road nearby. Someone sat inside, but in the twilight she couldn't make out their face. She accelerated, desperate to reach the house. That's how she described that fateful meeting to me later, and I believed her. All day, Mateo, Bones, and I worked strengthening the ranch's defenses. I found an old hunting rifle and checked the ammunition. Not much, but better than nothing. Bones fashioned several tripwires, primitive signaling devices around the perimeter. Mateo, despite his wound, worked alongside the adults as an assistant. We were just leaning over the ranch map when we heard Ellison's car screech to a halt at the porch. Seconds later, she burst into the house, breathless from running, her face contorted with fear. "They're coming tonight," she gasped. "Preston and Vega, I heard them discussing it. By midnight everything must be finished. No witnesses, that's what Vega said." I instantly became alert. "You're sure they were talking about us?" "I can't be absolutely certain," she admitted. "But when Vega saw me, he deliberately mentioned Mateo by name, a name I never uttered in his presence. They're watching us, Jack, and on my way back I saw a car parked by the road." Bones and I exchanged glances. Time was running out. "Bones, activate the perimeter alarms. Ellison." I trailed off, still uncertain if I could fully trust her after her recent betrayal. "I'm with you," she said firmly, straightening her shoulders. "Whatever happens." "Good, gather necessities and take them to the bunker, food, water, medicine. If things go wrong, you and Mateo will hide there." "And you?" Genuine concern colored her voice. "I'll defend the ranch," I answered, surprised by how natural the words felt. "This is the Thornhill ancestral home. I won't let them take it." Closer to midnight, I climbed to the attic, which offered a good view of the surrounding area. The moon, nearly full, bathed the fields in silvery light, making even the smallest landscape details visible. Raising old marine binoculars inherited from my grandfather, I slowly scanned the vicinity. At first, all was quiet, but then I noticed movement at the forest edge, dark figures moving from tree to tree. I counted at least 6 people, armed and clearly coordinating their actions. "They're here," I reported, descending to the kitchen where Bones was checking the hunting rifle. At least 6 people, armed, surrounding the house. Mateo, sitting nearby, tensely listened to the night sounds. "I hear vehicles," he said quietly. Ellison, pale with fear but composed, finished packing supplies for the bunker. "What now?" she whispered. "Now we wait," I answered, checking the rifle. "We don't shoot first. Let them make the first move." The tense waiting was broken by the jingling of our improvised alarm, tin cans on the western property boundary. I nodded to Bones. "It's starting. Mateo, you know what to do. Wait for my signal. Ellison, be ready to take Mateo to the bunker." I took position at the living room window facing west. Bones covered the eastern direction. We turned off lights in the house to avoid being easy targets. The first shot came unexpectedly. A bullet shattered the kitchen window, fragments scattering across the floor. Ellison cried out, but Mateo instantly pulled her into cover, behind the massive oak table overturned onto its side. "Range finding," I commented calmly. "They're checking if anyone's home and ready to respond." The shots continued, methodically, one at a time, targeting all first-floor windows. Bones and I didn't return fire, conserving ammunition and concealing our positions. "Why aren't we shooting back?" Ellison whispered. "Because that's what they're waiting for," Mateo explained with tactical wisdom surprising for his age. "If we start shooting, they'll see the muzzle flashes and know exactly where we are." After a series of single shots, silence fell. Then Vega's voice carried from the darkness. "Thornhill, we know you're in there. We have no quarrel with you or your wife. We just want the boy and the documents he stole. Hand them over and we'll leave." I didn't respond, signaling everyone to maintain silence. "Thornhill," Vega continued. "Think about it. This boy isn't even your real son. You don't know him. Is it worth risking your life and your wife's for him?" I glanced at Mateo, whose face in the half-light seemed carved from stone. The boy clearly expected I might agree to the deal. "He is my son," I finally replied with determination in my voice. "And this is my land. Leave while you still can." After these words, everything happened rapidly. Dark figures rushed toward the house from 3 directions. I noticed 2 trying to approach the back door. "Now," I commanded, and Bones opened fire with the rifle, aiming not at the people but at the ground before them, raising fountains of mud and forcing the attackers to retreat. I shot precisely, wounding one in the leg. He fell with a cry, and his comrades dragged him back toward the forest edge. Suddenly, an explosion erupted from the direction of the barn. One of Bones' homemade traps, a tripwire with a makeshift grenade, triggered when 2 attackers tried to approach from the rear. The fierce firefight continued for several minutes. Bones and I skillfully used the defenders' advantages, terrain knowledge, and prepared positions. The attackers, not expecting such serious resistance, retreated to the forest. "They'll regroup," I said, reloading the rifle. "That was just a reconnaissance attack." In the temporary reprieve, I checked everyone's condition. Bones unharmed, Mateo frightened but holding steady, Ellison pale but also okay. "I need to tell you something," she said, pulling me aside. "This is all my fault, not just the property sale documents. I told Preston about Mateo, about his wound, about you and Bones hiding him." I looked at her with bitterness. "I knew you were communicating with him about the documents, but telling him about Mateo, why Ellison?" "I thought he would help," she explained desperately. "He said he had connections in immigration services, that he could help the boy get documents. I didn't know he was connected to the cartel." I shook my head. "You just didn't want to know. All the signs were there." Our conversation was interrupted by a new sound, tires crunching on the gravel driveway. I rushed to the window and saw Preston's luxury SUV stopping in front of the house. Preston himself emerged, nervously looking around. "Thornhill," he shouted, "I've come to talk, no weapons." I signaled Bones to keep Preston in his sights, then stepped onto the porch, rifle at the ready. "Speak from there," I commanded. "Listen," Preston began, swallowing nervously. "This has all spiraled out of control. I just wanted to buy the ranch for my project. I didn't know these Mexicans would react this way about the boy." "You're lying," I replied calmly. "You knew exactly who you were dealing with. These investors are cartel and you know it." Preston paled. "Fine. Yes, I knew they weren't entirely clean, but I didn't sign up for murders. I'm a businessman, not a hitman." "What do you want, Preston?" "I want to help," he answered, wiping sweat from his brow. "Vega's gone crazy. He's threatening to kill everyone, including me, if I don't help him. Let's make a deal. You surrender the documents the boy has, I guarantee your safety. Everyone stays alive, including the child." At that moment, Ellison stepped onto the porch. "Victor, you promised to help Mateo with papers. You said you'd protect him." Preston seemed surprised by her appearance. "Ellison, go back inside. It's dangerous out here." "No," she replied, stepping forward. "I want the truth. Did you use me to get to Jack, to Mateo?" Suddenly, a shot rang out from the darkness. The bullet struck her shoulder and she fell. I rushed to her, dragging her back into the house, while Bones returned fire toward the forest where the shot originated. Preston panicked and ran toward his car but didn't make it. A bullet caught him in the back. He collapsed onto the gravel, trying to crawl toward the vehicle, but another shot seemed to finish him. He went still, sprawled on the ground. I pulled the wounded Ellison inside. The injury was serious but not fatal. The bullet had passed through cleanly, missing the artery. "Bones," I called, Need help here, Ellison's hit. Bones quickly examined the wound, utilizing his medical experience. Need to stop the bleeding and dress it. Mateo, bring my bag. While Bones attended to Ellison, I held her hand. She looked at me with pain-clouded eyes. I'm sorry. I've been such a fool. I thought I knew what I wanted. Big house, status, wealth. But none of it matters. Quiet, I soothed her. Save your strength. Ellison squeezed my hand. No, I must tell you. It's all my fault. I told Preston about the hiding place where Mateo keeps the documents. In the old mill. He forced me. Said otherwise he couldn't help the boy. Mateo and I exchanged alarmed glances. I've never imagined my wife's tongue was so loose. Now they know where to look, I said. We need to hide the documents elsewhere. After the first attack, an ominous silence fell. I used this time to relocate Mateo's documents to a new hiding place, an old safe my grandfather had built into the cellar wall, known only to family members. Bones finished treating Ellison's wound. She's lost a lot of blood, he told me. She needs real medical attention, not field surgery. I nodded. I'll call Haley. Besides her, no one can save her life right now. Dialing Haley's number, I quickly explained the situation. She promised to come as soon as possible, but warned she'd noticed strange vehicles on the road from town. Shortly after the call, a loud knock sounded at the door. I prepared to shoot, but heard a familiar voice. It's Gus Holloway. I'm not alone. Pastor Reed and some others are with me. Cautiously opening the door, I saw Gus, the pastor, and 5 other farmers from neighboring properties, all armed with hunting rifles and looking determined. What are you doing here? I asked in surprise. We heard gunshots and word spread through town, Gus answered, nodding toward Mateo peering from behind me. That Preston's men attacked you, that they want to take the ranch and harm the boy. I turned to Mateo. You told them when? Mateo shrugged embarrassedly. The first day when we were fixing the irrigation system. I wasn't sure I could fully trust you. Gus came to help, and I told him part of the story. He gave me his phone number just in case. Gus patted Mateo's uninjured shoulder. Smart kid. And he did right. We farmers need to stand together against the likes of Preston. Pastor Reed examined the wounded Ellison. I brought medical supplies from the church first aid kit. How is she? She'll live, Bones replied, but needs hospitalization. The reinforcements radically changed the situation. I quickly distributed people to positions around the house. Gus Holloway, also a Vietnam veteran, helped coordinate the defense. Suddenly, shots erupted from the barn area. A new attack had begun. This time the attackers acted more aggressively, using suppressive fire tactics. They want us pinned down while an assault team infiltrates the house, I analyzed. Classic tactics. Under cover of intensive fire, 3 attackers tried to approach the house from the south, but encountered the waiting farmers. A fierce firefight ensued. In the heat of battle, I noticed movement near the old mill, a partially collapsed building at the edge of the property. In the moonlight, I distinguished a figure painfully making his way toward the mill. It was Preston, who apparently hadn't been killed, only wounded. He knew about the hiding place from Ellison, I thought. Maybe he thinks the documents are still there. Bones, watch the house, I said. I'll check the mill. Using natural cover, I made my way to the old building. Inside, as I suspected, Preston frantically searched through old crates, looking for the hiding place Ellison had mentioned. Looking for something, Preston? I asked, aiming my rifle at him. He spun around abruptly, clutching a bleeding wound in his side. Thornhill, listen, this has all gone sideways. I never wanted anyone hurt. But you brought killers here, I replied. People hunting a child, my son. I didn't know he was your son when this started, Preston protested. I just wanted the land. Then Vega found out about the boy and the documents, and everything went to hell. Where are they? Have you found them? Preston looked around nervously. I haven't found anything, I swear. Ellison mentioned a hiding place somewhere here, but there's nothing. At that moment, Mateo appeared in the doorway of the mill, having disobeyed my order to stay in the house. Preston, in desperation, made a sudden move, pulling out a pistol. I instinctively threw myself between him and Mateo. A shot rang out, but the bullet only grazed my shoulder. With one blow, I knocked the weapon from Preston's hands. We grappled in vicious hand-to-hand combat. Despite his wound, Preston proved a strong opponent. He landed several painful blows, one striking my old chest wound, momentarily robbing me of breath. Preston seized the advantage, knocking me down and retrieving the fallen rifle. Sorry, Thornhill. Nothing personal, just business. In the second he prepared to fire, Mateo lunged at him, disrupting his aim. The shot went into the ceiling, collapsing part of the decrepit roof. I quickly recovered and together with my son overpowered Preston. He lost his balance and fell onto a pile of debris, striking his head. "You have no idea what you've gotten into, Thornhill," Preston gasped, wiping blood from his face. "These people won't stop. They'll kill everyone, including the boy, your entire family." "Not today," I replied, helping Mateo up. "Come on, son, we need to get back to the house." We left the wounded Preston in the mill and headed for the house, where the firefight seemed to be dying down. Returning to the house, we found the attackers had retreated after the intense exchange. The farmers were celebrating, believing they'd repelled the assault. But I, with my combat experience, sensed this was merely the calm before the storm. I noticed Haley's car had arrived. The nurse was already inside, treating the wounded Ellison and several farmers with minor injuries. "We need to evacuate Ellison to the hospital," Haley told me, removing bloody gloves. "I've stabilized her condition, but she needs surgery." "The roads still aren't safe," I replied. "Vega's men could have set an ambush." Suddenly, from the direction of the fields came new sounds, not gunshots, but crackling flames. Looking out the window, I saw with horror that the fields around the ranch were burning. The fire spread rapidly, forming a ring of flame around the property. "They've set the fields on fire," I shouted. "They're trying to smoke us out." Pastor Reed quickly organized a chain for fighting the fire, but it soon became clear we couldn't stop the blaze with our own resources. After the dry summer, the grass burned like gunpowder. "The irrigation system," I remembered. "Mateo, activate the irrigation we repaired yesterday. It's our only chance." Mateo rushed to the makeshift control panel, but at that moment the house went dark. Someone had cut the power lines. "The generator," I ordered. "There's an old generator in the barn." Bones and one of the farmers ran toward the barn, but couldn't reach it. Shots from the direction of the fields forced them back to the house. The ring of fire contracted around the homestead, smoke beginning to seep through the windows. Everyone gathered in the living room, trying to determine what to do next. Suddenly, the living room door burst open, and Vega entered, holding a pistol to Haley's temple. Behind him followed two of his men, keeping everyone else at gunpoint. "Weapons on the floor," Vega commanded, slowly. We had to comply, seeing Haley's life in danger. "How did you get in?" I asked, carefully lowering my rifle. "Through the cellar," Vega replied with a cold smile. "Your Cold War bunker has an exit to the river, very convenient." One of Vega's men brought Ellison from the bedroom, barely standing from weakness after her wound. They forced her to sit beside Haley. "So, Thornhill," Vega said, surveying the assembled group. "I need two things, the boy and the documents. Give them to me and your friends stay alive. Continue resisting and they die one by one, starting with these beautiful ladies." I glanced at Mateo. The boy was pale, but his eyes showed no fear, only determination and some signal I didn't immediately understand. "The documents are with Preston," I lied. "We left him wounded in the mill." "You're lying," Vega replied. "My men found Preston. He's dead and he had nothing on him." I felt the weight of the package in my jacket's inner pocket and realized Vega was bluffing. "Then we have a problem," I said, "because I don't know where the documents are." Vega approached Ellison and placed his pistol against her head. "Perhaps your wife knows." She proved quite an informative source for Preston. Ellison, despite her pain and fear, found strength to answer. "I know nothing. I told Preston about the hiding place, but I didn't know what was actually there." Vega smirked. "Pity, such a pity." He redirected his pistol at Haley. "What about the lovely nurse? Are you willing to sacrifice her for papers and a boy you barely know?" Haley's eyes met mine. They contained no plea, only calm acceptance and a silent message: "Don't give in." Outside, flames rose higher, smoke filling the house. Time was running out. But at that moment, I noticed Mateo had inconspicuously moved closer to the overturned table, beneath which lay the backup panel for the emergency power system. He was waiting for my signal. "All right," I said, raising my hands. "You win. The documents are with me." I slowly reached toward my inner pocket. Vega smiled. "See how simple. Now tell the boy to come here." I looked at Mateo and said in Spanish, "Tu mater te enseño, que a veces hay que retroceder para ganar." Your mother taught you that sometimes you must retreat to win. Mateo's eyes widened. He instantly understood. This was our code phrase, arranged during the irrigation system installation. In the next second, he pressed the button, and power flowed to the irrigation system. Powerful sprinklers activated, dousing the fire and creating a water curtain around the house. Simultaneously, I lunged at Vega, knocking him down. His pistol discharged, but the bullet went into the ceiling. A desperate struggle erupted. The farmers attacked Vega's men. Bones helped Haley free Ellison. Pastor Reed, despite his age, displayed surprising agility, knocking out one of the thugs with a heavy crucifix to the head. Vega proved a strong and dangerous opponent, but 2 against 1, unfair odds even for a professional killer. Mateo and I, functioning as a single unit, managed to overpower him. At the crucial moment, Mateo repeated the maneuver that had already saved me in the mill, knocked Vega off his feet when he nearly reached his pistol. I pinned Vega to the floor, knee pressed against his chest. "It's over, Phantasma. Your men have scattered, the fires extinguished, and the documents will soon be with the FBI." He glared at me with hatred, but also with a strange respect. "You don't know who you're dealing with, Thornhill. The cartel never forgets its enemies." "And I never forget those who threaten my family," I replied, using Gus's handcuffs to secure him to the radiator. "You can tell that to your bosses when you're rotting in federal prison." Stepping onto the porch, I saw the irrigation system still operating, extinguishing the final patches of fire. Dawn painted the sky in rosy hues, promising a new day. The ranch, though damaged, still stood. Mateo joined me, standing close. "We won," he said quietly, not fully believing it. I placed my hand on his shoulder. "Thanks to you, you're a true Thornhill." For the first time, I saw a genuine, open smile on his face. And in that moment, I understood that the ancestral home had found a new guardian. Chapter 4: New Roots. An old wisdom says, "After the storm comes stillness," but no one warns how ringing and strange that stillness will be. The dawn after the night of siege painted the sky with the colors of a fire that no longer existed. The scorched earth around the ranch had blackened, but the house stood, wounded, with shattered windows and bullet marks on the walls, but unbroken, like us. Vega, handcuffed to the cast-iron radiator, silently watched us with the unblinking gaze of a caged predator. His men had either fled or been captured by neighboring farmers. Preston, bleeding out, lay on the porch. We'd brought him from the mill, but his chances of survival were non-existent. Sheriff Bancroft arrived at the ranch with 2 deputies when smoke still drifted across the fields. His vehicle with flashing lights resembled a ship sailing through a sea of fog. "Good God Almighty," was all he said, exiting the car and surveying the destruction. I heard gunshots but never thought. Explaining what happened proved more difficult than I'd anticipated. How do you describe a cartel, incriminating documents, my unknown son, and my wife's betrayal without sounding like a madman? Start at the beginning, the sheriff suggested when we sat at the charred kitchen table, and don't omit anything. While I spoke, Haley, the sheriff's deputies, and the arrived ambulance crew attended to the wounded. Ellison was among the first taken to the hospital, her shoulder wound serious but not fatal. Mateo, whose condition worsened as his wound reopened, was next. I insisted on going with him, but he stopped me. "I'll manage," he said with surprising firmness for a 15-year-old. "Finish things here and come later, don't worry." From his tone, I understood. He feared I might not come, that I might abandon him as I had unwittingly abandoned his mother. "I'll come," I promised. "As soon as I give the documents to the sheriff. You're not alone, son." For a moment his eyes warmed and I glimpsed a spark of trust. Then the paramedics took him away. The document handover triggered a chain of events. The sheriff, after reviewing the package contents, immediately contacted the FBI. Within 2 hours, 4 agents in crisp suits were examining every inch of my property and questioning witnesses. Vega was taken away in handcuffs, escorted by 2 black SUVs with federal plates. His parting glance, thrown over his shoulder, promised this wasn't the end. But I knew for him everything had ended. With such evidence and Preston's murder on his conscience, El Fantasma wouldn't see freedom again in his lifetime. Preston's body was removed to the morgue. Somehow his death brought me no satisfaction, only bitterness at the thought that a man had traded his soul for the illusion of power and money. By evening the house stood empty. Only Bones, Haley, and I remained, the latter insisting on checking our wounds before leaving. The neighboring farmers had departed, promising to return tomorrow to help with repairs. "You should go to the hospital," Haley said, finishing treatment of the scratch on my shoulder. "Mateo needs you, and Ellison too." I nodded, feeling infinite exhaustion. "What about the ranch?" Bones asked, surveying the destruction. "It survived," I replied, "and we'll rebuild it." At the hospital, I went to Mateo first. He lay in a small room connected to an IV, pale but calm. Seeing me, he smiled slightly. "You came," he said, and this simple phrase contained a universe of unspoken emotions. "Of course I came." I sat beside his bed. "How are you?" "The doctor says I'll be fine. Clean wound, but I need to stay here a few days." We sat in silence. Then he asked, "What happens next? With me, I mean. Will you send me back to Mexico?" His voice carried such uncertainty that my heart ached. This boy had crossed a continent to find me, and now didn't know if I wanted him. "You'll stay with me," I said without hesitation. "If you want to, of course. We'll arrange all the documents. You're my son, Mateo, and the Thornhill Ranch is your home if that's what you want." His eyes filled with tears he tried to hide. "What about Ellison? She's your wife. She doesn't want me there." "Ellison," I sighed. "Ellison and I are separating. This was decided even before you appeared. We wanted different things from life. She won't object, believe me." He nodded as if needing to hear this confirmation, then said quietly, "Mom would have liked the ranch. She always wanted to live somewhere quiet, away from the city." "Tell me about her," I asked, "about your life together." And he began telling me about the small house in the mountains of Mexico where they lived until they had to flee, how she taught him to play guitar by kerosene lamplight, how she showed him a photograph of an American soldier, me, and said his father was a good man who protected others. I listened and the world around disappeared. And when he finished, I realized I was crying for the first time in many years. After Mateo, I visited Ellison. She lay in a private room, pale, her shoulder bandaged. Seeing me, she attempted to smile, but it came out forced. "How are you?" I asked, sitting beside her. I'll live, she shrugged her good shoulder weakly. Doctor says I can move my arm in a couple of weeks. The shoulder will heal completely, unlike us. Her eyes held a question I couldn't ignore. Ellison, Don't, Jack, she interrupted me. I understand everything. We tried, but it didn't work, and after what I did, she turned away, hiding tears. Forgive me, I truly didn't know what I was getting into with Preston. I just wanted a different life, I finished for her. I know, and I don't blame you for that. You deserve to find what makes you happy. She looked at me gratefully. You're an amazing man, Jack Thornhill. Much better than I deserve. Not true, I objected. We're just made for different paths. We talked for a long time. About the future. About the divorce that would be officially processed when Ellison recovered. About where she would go afterward. Her sister in Boston had offered shelter and a job at a marketing firm. I heard Mateo is staying with you, she said before I left. Yes, if he wants to. He will. She smiled genuinely for the first time in ages. I've seen how he looks at you, Jack, like you're a hero. I snorted, some hero I am. For him, the real thing. Ellison paused, then added, You know, I felt jealous when I first saw you two talking. You looked at him so, openly. You haven't looked at me that way in a long time. Her words caught me off guard, but I realized she was right. With Mateo, I was authentic, without the masks and defensive barriers I'd built during years of war. I hope you find someone you'll look at the same way, I said, shaking her hand goodbye. Her eyes sparkled, and you, it seems, have already found someone. I didn't immediately understand who she meant, but then caught her hint. Haley, I felt myself blushing, we're just. Not just, she gently objected. I see how you change around her, how your voice softens. Don't miss this chance, Jack. A month later, the Thornhill Ranch looked completely different. Fields scorched during the fire had begun greening after heavy autumn rains. The house stood repaired, new windows, fresh paint, fixed roof. Mateo, Bones, and I, with help from neighbors, worked from dawn till dusk, restoring what had been destroyed. Bones proved a talented carpenter. The old mill where the fight with Preston occurred transformed under his guidance into a cozy workshop for Mateo. I installed an old wooden workbench, and the boy began crafting miniature motorcycle models, pursuing his dream of becoming a custom bike mechanic. The documents Mateo brought from Mexico led to the arrest of several high-ranking cartel members and their American partners. The FBI offered us witness protection, new names, new location, but we declined. I'm done running, Mateo said when I asked his opinion. I don't want to hide my whole life. Vega's in prison, and the cartel will find new markets and forget about me. His words contained such determination that I didn't argue. Instead, we installed a modern security system and kept the old hunting rifle ready, just in case. Ellison was discharged from the hospital after 2 weeks. Before leaving for Boston, she stopped by to say goodbye, no longer as a wife, but as someone closing one chapter of life and opening another. We sat on the porch, surveying the fields, and at some point, Ellison said something that surprised me. Now I understand why your grandfather cherished this land so much. Not for money or status. Generations of your family put down roots here. This is something I never had, a sense of belonging. Her words contained no bitterness, only realization. She'd found her path, and that path led away from Wolf Creek, from the Thornhill Ranch, from me. Among those who became part of our new life, Haley occupied a special place. At first, she visited several times weekly to check how Mateo's wounds were healing. Then she began bringing books, engineering texts for him, old detective novels for me. One evening we sat on the porch, myself, Mateo, Bones, and Haley. Twilight wrapped the fields in soft purple light. Mateo showed sketches of a motorcycle he was designing for the creek on the northern property boundary. Haley, sitting beside me, accidentally touched my hand with hers. Our eyes met, and I realized I didn't want this moment to end. "Stay for dinner?" I asked. "I'd love to," she replied, and her smile was warmer than any fire. Later, when Mateo and Bones had gone inside, we remained alone on the porch, watching the stars. "What are you thinking about?" Haley asked. "The strange paths of fate," I replied. "I returned here to lick my wounds and hide from the world. Instead, I found a son, friends, new purpose. And you?" She smiled. "Sometimes the deepest wounds heal not through isolation, but through new connections." I carefully took her hand, and she didn't pull away. The next day, Mateo suggested making a new sign for the ranch. The old one, simply reading Thornhill Ranch, Est 1887, hung on the main gate, but time and weather had nearly erased the letters. We worked on it together. I carved the board from sturdy oak. He burned the letters following my sketch. Bones helped with the mountings, and in the evening Haley joined us, bringing special protective varnish for wood. We turned the installation of the new sign into a small ceremony. Pastor Reed, Gus Holloway, Sheriff Bancroft, and other neighbors gathered at the ranch gate. Bones playfully saluted when Mateo and I removed the covering from our creation. Thornhill Ranch, Est, 1887, reborn 2023. That evening, when everyone had left, Mateo and I sat on the porch. He played an old guitar Gus had found at a yard sale in the neighboring town, a Mexican melody his mother had taught him. "You know," he said, pausing, "Mom was right about you." "In what way?" "That you're a good man, that you protect those you care about." He hesitated, then added, "I'm glad I found you." "And I'm glad you found me," I replied, feeling something warm spreading in my chest. From the house came Haley's voice, calling us to dinner. Bones was already setting plates, arguing with her about which wine best complemented roasted potatoes. Mateo and I exchanged glances and synchronously smiled. Then we rose and walked toward the house, toward people who had become our family, toward the ancestral home that hadn't merely survived but found new life. War still occasionally visited me in nightmares, but now when I woke from horrors, Haley was beside me and my son slept in the next room, and that changed everything. They say you can't step into the same river twice, but sometimes you can return home and discover that during your absence it has become better than you remembered. Like an old tree that appears dead after winter, but with spring's arrival sends forth new, strong shoots. The new roots of the Thornhill ancestral home reach deep into the soil, nourishing not only the present, but the future as well. If you enjoyed this story, please support the author with a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you.